Hi, I'm Jacqueline.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes. We got a lot to say over here, huh?
Yeah, I'm like drawing a blank like we always do, where we just sit here and chat for only 20 minutes
Mm-hmm.
tonight. That wasn't too bad. It was pretty
Wasn't
short
too
as
bad,
far
yeah.
as our chat sessions go, which I also feel like we've seen each other in person quite a bit the last few weeks, so maybe that's why.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, because I saw you Friday and Saturday.
Yeah.
So a lot of like double seeing you on the weekends.
And Wednesday.
Oh yeah, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday.
Yeah, exactly. So, and
And we
last
recorded
weekend,
Tuesday. So I talked to
yes,
you Tuesday too.
exactly. And then last weekend I saw you both days. Plus, I think a day during the week. Did we do something? Maybe not. It's all running together. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
But you know what? We have quite a few updates.
yeah,
So we can just get right into those.
I say we just hop into them. Um, so I read this news article yesterday. So Luis Armando Albino was 6 years old when he was abducted from Oakland, California in 1951. And just this year, he was found alive on the East Coast, which has been 70 years since he was abducted. So,
Crazy. Crazy that
yeah.
he's still, I mean, 76 isn't that old, but when you think about the fact that you were kidnapped, the fact that you're still alive, um,
Yeah, when you think about the fact that you've been a missing person for 70 years and you're like out
yeah.
here alive, living your life.
Because I feel like usually at that point with families, they're like, well, like they're not coming back. And then you're like, oh shit.
Yeah. And like his mother passed away, I think it was like 15 years ago, something like that, which is just so sad that she died thinking that I'm
Mhm.
sure that her son was gone and he's been alive this entire time. And we were talking before we started recording, at 6 years old, you're pretty, you can usually remember a lot of things. So it's like, did he block it out because it was this traumatic event? Did this person who kidnapped him like lie to him and convince him, you know, of his reality, which can definitely happen if you like tell yourself something enough times, you can fully believe that it's true. The article didn't really say kind of what he said about the kidnapping. And Andrew had a good point too. He's like, man, he's like, after that long, do you even tell this guy or do you just keep it to yourself? Like,
Yeah. Do you just let him live out the rest of his life, like not knowing?
yeah, because it was, I
Like,
think, like a great niece or something, that was doing like an ancestry DNA and found like a connection that was like, oh, I wonder if this could be like my missing uncle. And then
mhm.
found out that it was and he was notified and everything. But yeah, I mean, that is a good consideration. Like after 70 years, like you were 76 years old and you find out that you were kidnapped 7 decades ago and you have this entire
Yeah.
family. Do you tell the person?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a
Yeah.
tough one.
Yeah. But I mean, happy someone got closure in this scenario. At least, his family that's still here now
Hmm.
knows that he's been alive and okay this whole time. So
Yeah.
a little bit of a happy ending.
A little bit, at least. At least there's answers, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
What doesn't have a happy ending is our
Mm.
next
Yeah.
one. So this is like extremely relevant to the day we are recording this, September 24th. And that is because Marcellus Williams was executed today in Missouri, and was an innocent man and
Mm.
has been basically proven to be innocent.
Yeah.
And they continued on with his execution anyway. So basically, he was found guilty of murdering Felicia Picus. Picus. Back in 1998, she was murdered in her gated community. And then after he was sentenced to death, there were a lot of like anti-death penalty activists that found that the DNA at the scene actually did not match Marcellus Williams. So the DNA they
Hmm.
found did not match. And they've called for a stay of execution multiple times. The victim's family has also asked for him not to be executed. Um, but as of 5 p.m. today, he was executed in the state of Missouri after the
Mm.
Supreme Court denied his final bid for a delay.
Just absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
Like how do we
Yeah.
have a system where this is how things are allowed to go.
Yeah. So, like the Innocent Project had his case, multiple people today, especially, is why I saw it, is they were like, please call the state of Missouri, like, please contact, like, this does not need to be happening. Like, this man is innocent
Hmm.
and is extremely relevant to this story we're telling today of
Hmm.
even if someone may not have done it, they don't just immediately get released or immediately get a stay of execution. And now an innocent man has
Yeah.
been executed in the state of Missouri because of an unjust criminal justice system. So,
Yeah. So like we said, it's not going to get better from here.
no.
But we do have one more update. We have talked about this on the podcast before, right?
Yes, technically
Okay.
in last week's episode.
Okay, gotcha. So there was a shooter in Kentucky who was on the run for like 2 weeks, that they were like looking everywhere for him, who was like shooting multiple people on I-75 in Kentucky. But they did this week confirm that his body was found. From what I read, it sounded like the body was fairly decomposed, which is why it took a while to like confirm for sure that it was him. He did die from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, so I'm guessing that that was kind of right after the shooting happened, and that,
Hmm.
he hasn't been alive for these weeks that they've been searching for him, because it sounded like the body was pretty decomposed at that point. But
And
we do
apparently it
have,
was like very close to where the shooting take took place. And I'm like,
oh, interesting.
yeah, basically like what people were saying is like when they started searching, like they went right instead of left. And he
Hmm.
was left
He was like
instead
right
of right.
there. Yeah.
Like he was like pretty close, but like it was like a couple found the body because
Yeah. Yeah.
they were like, we want this fear for everyone to be done, but also there's reward money. So
Yeah.
yeah, so and I understand sometimes it can take a while to identify a body, but I was getting a little tinfoil hat when it took so long because they were like, we believe it's him. And I'm like,
Yeah.
but what if it's not?
Yeah. And like,
And you're telling
what?
everyone, like, the Kentucky police commissioner was like, this is solved, it is done. And I'm like,
Hmm.
maybe wait, because he could have definitely killed someone and like put him there to like pretend to be him. Like,
Yeah, because like when I read, the reason they said that initially was like the clothing match, like the weapon match. But yeah, you could easily like set that up and then take
hmm
off and be like, oh,
like put your clothes on someone else, like
yeah.
all that. So I was like, maybe be sure before you're like, the search is over.
But yeah, that's why I think that it probably happened pretty fairly soon. I don't know why I put so many adjectives in there. After
Pretty
the
fairly,
shooting.
very quickly soon.
Exactly. It's like we're writing a paper. We got to get to that 1,000 word minimum.
Yeah,
We're just putting them all
exactly.
in there, because it was so decomposed that it like, I think they said it took a while to like extract some of the DNA
hmm
that they needed because of the
Yeah, and I know like
decomposition of the body.
vultures were in the area too. It's been
Yeah,
hot, so
yeah,
a lot of, I'm sure, like wildlife contaminating
yeah.
the body and all of that.
It has been so hot. Can we talk about how
Mhm.
it is almost October? I know that by the time
Yeah.
you guys are hearing this, it is October, but as we said, we're recording this on September 24th, but it's almost October and it's still like 90 degrees outside. And I'm just,
I just got a TV stand fireplace and I want to light that bitch up. And
right?
I
I want my
can't.
fall candles. I
It'll be too
want
hot.
my PSLs. I want cool, brisk weather. I want to just
I want to
not be
wear a
sweating.
cardigan. Yeah. Yeah, it's been real hot.
Yeah.
But we're getting some rain, so maybe it'll cool it off. But
Yes. Hopefully. Hopefully.
well, it's a sad one today, so we'll go ahead and get into it.
Aren't they all?
Um, basically, that's what happens when you have a true crime podcast.
Yeah, that's what we do here.
Yeah. So our resources this week are a People Magazine Investigates episode, season 4, episode 12, Murder in Motor City, a Detroit Free Press article, mourningourlosses.org, and a CNN article. Greg Harris was found murdered in 1972 after he'd been missing for 9 months. Richard Palombo and Richard Phillips were quickly convicted of his murder, but did they really do it? Tune in to find out on tonight's news. That's what I feel like I was when I just read that.
I feel like there are spoilers too, since we mentioned that today's episode was very timely.
A partial spoiler, though. There's going to be some twists and turns before we
That's
get there.
true. That's true.
So, Detroit in the 1960s was a very exciting place that was booming. The automobile factories were thriving. Everyone was like partying. A lot of people were moving to Detroit because of this new industry. 70 to 80% of Black families worked at the automobile industry, and there were like really great resources. So, today we hear a lot of like the struggles in Detroit, but like in the 1960s, it was like expanding and thriving and booming and like a great place to live, really. So a lot of families in the north end of Detroit knew each other and worked together. So Greg Harris had a beautiful smile and his nickname was Chocolate, and he was a bit of an introvert. His brother Alex was more extroverted and a little bit more like rough around the edges than Greg. Like he was the more like troublemaker of the two, while Greg was a little bit more quiet. And there was a group of friends that included Greg, Alex, Fred Mitchell, Richard Phillips and Griggs Truitt. So they all lived in the same neighborhood and they were super close and they were like brothers. They partied together. If someone got into a fight, they'd all jump in. Like they were just this really, really tight knit group. But as they became young adults, they did kind of grow apart a little bit. They grew up, they're getting married, starting families, just kind of grow apart sometimes. And Alex actually ended up marrying Fred Mitchell's sister. Alex So like Fred was like Alex's like brother-in-law and I guess like kind of Greg too because of the family thing. Like it gets kind of confusing. I don't really consider it like I don't know. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But like I know people do call it that. Like my brother-in-law might call my sister his sister-in-law, but it's like
Yeah.
extended. But
Yeah.
like Alex and Fred are brothers-in-laws and then Greg is Alex's brother. So,
I think that can get confusing with like what you technically are to that person, but like what you call them, you
yeah.
know? Because like I call my husband's brother's wife my sister-in-law, but like technically she's not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's just like easier to do that, especially like when they're married, because you're like, oh, them, but it's like, you know. So on June 26, 1971, Greg was spending time with his family. Greg had gotten married and they had just had a baby boy, and he loved his baby. He was very excited to be a father. And around noon, he told his wife he was going to go to the store to get cigarettes and he would be back quickly. And his wife actually had to leave for work like soon, and he knew she needed the car. So she's like, okay, he'll be back soon because he knows like I have to go to work. So a few hours pass, and now it's apparent that Greg isn't coming back, and she doesn't really panic at this moment, but she's like, well, I'll call in sick to work. I'll wait for him to come around. And then the next morning, Greg was still not back, so she decided to call her family to try and look for Greg. Her sister and brother-in-law looked all through the neighborhood. They looked anywhere he normally hung out, but didn't see him. So they're like, he didn't like lose track of time or start catching up or, go for a drink and then kind of get carried away and forget, like, we're not finding him anywhere. And they eventually found his vehicle in an alley, and his wife noticed blood in the back seat of the car. So she's like, I don't know who this blood belongs to. Is this Greg's blood? Is this someone else's blood? So Greg's wife and his mother went to the Detroit Police Department and filed a missing persons report. And the police had the car towed. And then a few days later, they returned the car to her. But it doesn't appear like they'd done any testing. Like all of the blood was still on the car. There was no like dust from fingerprinting. Like they just returned the car in the exact condition they picked it up in. So the police seem to not really care at all about this missing persons report and a car found with blood in it. Don't know why. And Greg's wife was like 19, 20 years old, and the police was just like not taking her seriously. So rumors kind of circulate, but months go by with no word from Greg. And Alex actually around this time moved to Pittsburgh. So with how quickly he left, police are like, is Alex responsible? And did he have something to do with Greg's disappearance? Because he's just bolting out of town right after his brother's murdered. But police didn't interview anyone. They didn't talk to anyone. Nothing. And at the
Wow.
time, yeah, at the time, the police were majority white, policing a majority black city, and were very racist. So Griggs is in the episode and is like, I mean, it's just common knowledge, like cops were racist back then. Like, I don't think we need to debate that. It's just like a fact at this point. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
But it's just like still weird to me that there's like blood in the car. And if you're like racist, like wouldn't you want to be like finding something? Like, it's just so weird that they're like,
They're just like not
it's
even worth
fine.
my time. Yeah.
So there was no follow-up on his disappearance until 9 months later. So on March 3rd, 1972, a man was working on a repairing a road in Oakland County in Troy, Michigan. It was 19 miles from the center of Detroit. And at this time, it was kind of like the middle of nowhere. Today, it's not that way. It's expanded. There's a lot more stuff there. But in 1972, it was like kind of the middle of nowhere. And the man had stopped to pee in the field and he saw a body. And this is the time, if you somehow have like a true crime bingo, like we always have it where somebody stops to pee and finds a body.
Yeah.
Like that's got to be on the bingo card, right?
All the time. 100%.
It's always someone peeing. So he went back and got his coworker and they contacted the police department. So the body had clearly been in the elements for a while, and it was mostly bones being held together by some scrapes of clothing. The skull had holes in it, so it was very clear this was a crime. And the medical examiner determined it was a black male who had died approximately 9 months ago. And the cause of death was gunshot wounds to the head, and manner of death was homicide. And two lead bullets were recovered, and they were determined likely from a 22 caliber revolver. So Greg's wife and mother were able to identify pieces of clothing and confirmed it was Greg Harris's clothing. So the families took it very hard, obviously, because now your loved one, you found out what happened. And at this point, Alex still had not been seen or heard from since Greg's murder. So they're like, okay, kind of weird. And basically, all evidence is gone because the body has been in the elements for 9 months. I mean, you've had, summer because it was in June, you've had snow, you've had every kind of thing imaginable happening in these 9 months. So police try to investigate friends and family, and they discover that a 22 caliber revolver was confiscated 9 months earlier from Fred Mitchell, who was Greg's brother-in-law by marriage, again because Alex had married Fred's sister. So the weapon was tested by the crime lab, and it showed that the bullets could have been fired from the gun, but not definitively. So it's not like this is the murder weapon, but it's like they could have come from this. So how did this revolver just like come into police custody right after Greg's disappearance? So on July 1st, 1971, during a traffic stop, Fred, Griggs, and a friend were stopped by police, and police made them all get out of the car, and they found the gun underneath Fred's seat. So Griggs was like, "We did not know Fred had a gun until the police found it. Like he did not tell us that at all." And Fred was on parole for a manslaughter charge from when he was a teenager. So he should have been arrested and brought back to prison because this is a violation of his parole, but he wasn't, and no charges were ever brought from him from that case. And the police like did take the gun and put it in the property room, but they didn't do anything with it after that. So I'm not really sure like why nothing came of this. But
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, they just like didn't charge him. They just put the gun in a property room, didn't think anything of it. So now Fred is like their prime suspect. So they went to find him, and he was actually already in prison on a robbery charge. And Fred tells them he knows who killed Greg Harris. He said that Richard Palombo had killed Greg. Fred and Palumbo were friends from prison and they were always together. And he said that Palumbo did the murder with Richard Phillips. So both of their first names are Richard, which is confusing. So we try to call them by their last names, which also both start with a P, so not helpful, but by their last names from the rest of the episode to try to not get confused.
Yes.
So Fred said that Greg had robbed Palumbo's cousin, who was in the mafia, so they had to kill Greg as payback for that robbery. So Phillips and Palumbo had planned this out for a while, and they brought Fred in, and they wanted Fred to be the one who like drug Greg out to them. But Fred said he didn't want to be a part of the murder. But then Palumbo promised to get him connections with the Italian mob and pressure him into it. As you do, I guess.
Apparently.
No, I don't want to murder him. Yes, I want connections with the Italian mob. Like,
Yeah.
what? So on June 26th, Fred calls Greg, lures him to Davidson's drugstore with Phillips and Palumbo, and Fred said Greg picked all three of them up and then he just like dropped Fred off. So Fred is just dropped off. He's like, I don't know what happened, but later they picked me back up without Greg and said it was done. Palumbo gave the gun to Fred, which was why he had it on him on that traffic stop on July 1st. So, detectives tracked down Phillips and Palumbo, who were both in prison after being convicted of armed robbery. So, on September 6th, 1971, two men walked into a convenience store, and the black man stood next to the door as a lookout, and the white man pulled a gun and demanded money. And they only stole like less than $10 in cash, so pretty bad robbery on their
Yeah, like
part, like didn't
what's
get
the
a lot
point?
there. Yeah, so someone called and reported the car driving erratically, and the registration came back to Richard Palumbo, who'd been staying with Fred and Phillips the night before. So Palumbo pleaded guilty, but the black man who was the lookout like hadn't been found yet, and they rounded up like a lot of black men for the lineup. So Richard Phillips had been called down for the lineup as well as Fred Mitchell. And Fred and Phillips did kind of resemble each other. And Phillips got called out of the lineup. So Griggs kind of said, like, it doesn't really surprise me. Like, they did kind of look alike, but especially, same build, same complexion. We know a lot if someone is trying to identify someone of another race, they're usually not very accurate. But
Yeah.
they did have similarities. Like I don't think they're twins. Like I don't think they could pass as each other, but like they have similar features.
Hmm.
So Philip said code of the street was to not tell on your friends, no matter what. So he's like, I'm not gonna rat out Fred, who actually had done the robbery. He's like, I'm not gonna rat him out because that's not what you do. Like snitches get stitches. I'm not doing that. Um, and Palumbo took the stand in Philip's trial and said he would not say the name of who was his accomplice. So Palumbo's taking the stand and is like, I'm not telling you the name of the guy who did this with me. Either way, Phillips was found guilty and sentenced to 7 years in prison. So, kind of back to March 1972, they asked Phillips for his alibi for June 26th, but he did not have one. He's like, I don't know where I was that day. Palumbo also did not have an alibi. Again, this is 1971, before cell phones, email. Like it was kind of described as they're all kind of living not the best life, like kind of jumping around all kinds of places, maybe dabbling in a few drugs, drinking, all that. Like they don't know where they were. And even for us, it would be hard to say where we were.
Yeah. Was it maybe just kind of a chaotic lifestyle, and especially if you don't have any kind of like electronic
Hmm.
stuff to back up, like, okay, let me go back and see what I was doing when, who I was talking to. I mean, it's hard to remember stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. It's like especially like if I didn't have my phone where I could just like look at a date and kind of figure out what was happening, like no clue what I was doing that day.
Before we started recording this episode, we're like, who edits this episode? And we had to look up
We,
who edited last, and that was 2 weeks ago.
yeah.
So clearly
Yeah.
we would not be good at that.
No. So Phillips and Palumbo were charged with murder and conspiracy to commit murder. So in September 1972, the murder trial begins, and Fred Mitchell was the prosecution's star witness. So Phillips was shocked when he saw him on the stand testifying. As you remember, Phillips earlier did not rat out Fred Mitchell for the robbery because he was like, you don't tell on your friends. So he was like, I realized in that moment, like, Fred is not my friend. He's not my friend. Like, that I think was a really, really low blow for him. Like, because you're like someone you consider to be a friend is now testifying against you. So Phillips said he did not kill Greg Harris and now is feeling betrayed by Fred Mitchell. And Fred testifies for hours and tells the same story he told police. So Palumbo's lawyer called many family members to testify to prove his family had no mafia connections. So they're like, no one has Italian mob connections in this family. So that's how they're trying to show the story was fabricated. But again, there's no fingerprinting on Greg's car, there's no blood testing, nothing. There's no scientific evidence in this trial. And it really boils down to who does the jury believe? A black man in 1971 standing trial is not really going to end well. Phillips said the whole jury was all white and there was not a single other black person in the courtroom with him. So he's like, I'm not having a jury of my peers, and like, they don't care if there's scientific evidence or not. So Phillips' attorney did not give an opening statement, and he let Palumbo's attorney do all of the cross-examining because they were like tried at the same time together. So his attorney doesn't give an opening statement, doesn't challenge Fred Mitchell, doesn't call any witnesses or introduce any evidence. He doesn't let Phillips take the stand. Basically, this man did nothing.
He's
Um,
like, the other attorney has it taken care of.
yeah,
I'm just gonna sit back and chill.
yeah. And his closing statement, all he said was, quote, they talk about Gregory Harris being dead. I don't know if Gregory Harris is dead, unquote.
That's one way to look at it, I guess.
Yeah. I guess that's your reasonable doubt. Is this man even dead? Like,
He's doing the bare
oh,
minimum over here. I feel like
yeah.
we all know people like that at work.
Yeah. It makes me think like this was one of the moments, like something I went to in college that was like such an eye-opening moment where it was like someone came and there was like a talk or something I went to, and it was like a defense attorney who was just saying, he was like, I can't tell you how many like death penalty cases I have sat in where the person's public defender falls asleep during trial
My
when
God.
their client is facing the death penalty. And it's like so many public defenders are just like overloaded too. He was like, I'm not saying like they're
Hmm.
all like, I'm sure they all have good intentions, but then they get so overloaded they can't even give any time to their client. But it's like, oh, again, this is just the fucked up justice system,
Yeah,
basically.
it really is.
In October 1972, the jurors deliberated for 4 hours. Palumbo and Phillips were found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and they're sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. They both say they were innocent and didn't kill Greg. But this is not the end of the story. We're not going to wrap it up with a little bow. Jacqueline hasn't even started talking yet, so you know it's not the end of the story.
You know, there's a lot left to be covered.
So, to prove his innocence, Phillips needs to prove that Fred Mitchell lied under oath. So, Phillips spoke to his wife and he said, I don't want the kids coming to see him in prison. He said he didn't want them to come and like be searched and groped and all of that. He told stories of like seeing other kids like coming in diapers whose like diapers were being taken off and like searched. And he's like, I don't want my kids to have to go through that. And then he like told his wife like just move on. He just didn't want it to involve anyone he loved like in this pain and suffering. The CNN article that we referenced also kind of hinted that Phillips may not have been like a steady figure in his kid's life around this time anyway, so that could also explain his stance like a little bit more of like, it's not like he was like primary caregiver and then was like, hey, don't come see me. It was like they kind of had a little bit of a strained relationship. And he was just like, I don't want to put them through extra trauma of like coming here and like being groped to like come see me in this state.
Yeah. Obviously, prison was very tough. Phillips said he witnessed many people dying by suicide. Even one of his best friends died by jumping off of the gallery. And Phillips decided to start improving himself in any way that he could. So he did drop out of high school in the 10th grade, but in prison, he got his GED and went to college and graduated with honors. He then started studying law. He wanted to convince a court to give him an appeal, and he also got a job in prison around this time in the license plate factory. So he earned about $100 a month plus bonuses. So he saved all of this in his bank account for 4 years to be able to afford an appellate lawyer. So he just kept waiting. And on January 1st, 1979, Phillips heard that Fred Mitchell was in the chow hall. So Phillips and a friend had made homemade knives. They put them in their sleeves and headed that way. However, he changed his mind because he thought, okay, this would actually make me a murderer. So he let Fred go and did not approach him. Phillips appealed in 1979 and the courts denied it. And in 1982, he filed a writ of habeas corpus, and a judge agreed that he should have the rights to a new trial. So Phillips was starting to feel hope, but the Michigan Court of Appeals denied him. Phillips was discouraged, but decided he needed to find something in prison to help keep his sanity. So he started drawing and then also soon started painting. So he used this as an outlet for all of the despair he was feeling, missing his kids, his wife, the heartbreak of being convicted of something that he was innocent of. He eventually decided to join the prison pen pal program. He had a friendship with a lady that started in the 1980s, and they wrote usually every week. And he told her he needed someone to store and keep his artwork, and so she offered to hold them for him. His legal battle continued, and he was trying to prove his innocence. And many counselors told him, like, just admit it, and one day you may be released. But he refused. He's like, no, I'm innocent. I'm not going to just say I did it, even though that might get me out sooner. In 1989, he was charged with assault and battery on staff. So the inmates had built a nativity scene for Christmas, and another inmate kicked off a lamb's head. Phillips said that he was disrespecting Jesus, and neither inmate backed down. And in the chaos, a guard said that Philip grabbed the guard's shoulders and turned him around. So Phillips denied this and gave a list of 56 witnesses who could say that this did not happen. The prison investigator only contacted 4 of the witnesses, and it's unknown what they said. And there was no one that corroborated the guard story. But of course, authorities believed the guard, and Phillips was found guilty. So he spent Christmas in solitary confinement on a bed with no sheet. In 1992, the trial court found that Fred Mitchell had been offered a deal in exchange for his testimony. So the deal was that he would plead guilty in a separate armed robbery charge, and he wouldn't be charged with accessory to first-degree murder in Greg Harris's case. So it seemed that his sentence kept getting shortened as he continued cooperating. And at the end, his sentence was 4 to 10 years. So the defense had not been told about this deal, so this is prosecutor. The defense had not been told about this deal, so this is prosecutor. Fuck.
It's a hard one.
I'm just gonna leave that in.
Prosecutorial.
Prosecutorial misconduct.
Yeah, that.
Exactly. You guys know what I mean. The prosecution is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, okay? So the trial court granted Phillips a new trial, but the Court of Appeals again denied it. So at this point, Phillips was feeling very discouraged and giving up hope. Then in 2014, he was visited by David Moran's team from the Michigan Innocence Clinic. So David said his team looked into his case and read the trial transcript, and David knew they had to fight for Phillips. Phillips also knew this was his last shot at proving his innocence. So the Michigan Innocence Clinic started digging to find new evidence, and soon they got a tip about Richard Palombo. So Palombo was tried and convicted in the same trial as Phillips, and in 2010, he testified at a parole hearing and said he had participated in the Greg Harris murder, but Phillips had not. So he detailed how he became friends with Fred Mitchell in prison. He said that Fred Mitchell told him he wanted to kill Greg Harris, and he said that Alex and Greg had stolen $500 from his mother, and he wanted retribution. So Fred lures Greg to go with him and Palombo. They drive to an alley, and in the alley, Fred shot and killed Greg, and then they drove the body out to Troy and buried it. So Palombo did not come out in 1971 and tell the truth. But many say that Fred had an unusual hold on Palombo, and Palombo did whatever Fred told him to do. So Palombo admitted all of this in 2010 because he was trying to get clemency but was unsuccessful. And Phillips was also shocked at this news. He also thought that Palombo was 100% innocent in this case and that they had both been wrongfully convicted. And Phillips and Palombo had never been housed in the same prison and had never exchanged letters.
Which is so crazy too, because you're like, wow, we're both in jail, wrongfully convicted, and I'm like fighting for my innocence. And then you're like, I sat next to this guy in trial and he knew I did not commit this and he did.
Yeah.
And he still fucking said nothing.
Exactly.
Like, what?
So Alex left town quickly because he thought he was next after Greg was murdered. So Fred Mitchell was the one who killed Greg all along, and he was the star witness in the trial that convicted Phillips. However, it's not as simple as just showing this testimony to the court. So they need Palombo to testify to the appeals court, but Palombo took the Fifth Amendment and refused to testify. So David Moran's team had his sworn testimony, and that can be admitted in lieu of live testimony. But the prosecution argued that it was inadmissible. The defense argued back and was successful in getting it to be admissible under the rules of evidence, and the judge agreed to consider this testimony. So the real key was putting Phillips on the stand. He was a very sincere and convincing man, and the judge believed him. He was granted a new trial, but Phillips is still cautious because he's been denied so many times at this point, and we know that new trials can also just take many years.
Yeah, because there were so many times they'd be like, yeah, you get a new trial, and the Court of Appeals was like, no new trial. So he's like, this means nothing to me. I've been here before. Like,
yeah, he's like, I'm not getting my hopes up. So now in January of 2018, a brand new prosecutor's conviction integrity unit starts up, and the new unit is to investigate if someone in the county was wrongfully convicted and incarcerated, and if so, they're trying to right the wrong. So Valerie Newman was the director of the conviction integrity unit, and Phillips' case was one of the first they reviewed. So they reinvestigate Greg's murder case, and they found a timeline from 1971 that proved Fred Mitchell's testimony was not true. According to Palombo's testimony in 2010, Palombo and Phillips did not know each other at the time of the murder. They had zero knowledge of each other and hadn't met until 8 days later, and only through Fred. So they met on July 4th, 1971, and Greg was murdered on June 26, 1971. It was also later revealed that someone reached out to Greg's mother in 1971 and said, "I can't hold it in any longer. A Fred Mitchell and a guy named Dago took your son out of a car at LaSalle Street. They shot him in the head and killed him. They then took him out near 10 Mile Road and tossed him from the car." So Dago was Palumbo's nickname. And it's unclear what police did with this information, but apparently nothing productive since nothing came from that.
Literally didn't get brought up again until 2018.
Yeah. So Fred also said in his testimony that they had multiple meetings prior to Greg's murder where Palombo and Phillips were trying to recruit him. However, they discovered that Palombo had been released from prison 1 day prior to Greg's murder, so these supposed meetings could not have taken place because Palombo was in prison. So, how did none of this get checked by anyone?
They literally had this man sit down and say all this, and they were like, "Bet, that sounds good. Put him on the
Yeah.
stand." And then they're like, "You're not
Okay,
even
great.
gonna be like, you don't think that someone might be deceiving you to protect themselves? Like, you're not gonna be like,
Uh-huh.
okay, let me reference this to something else." And if you looked for 1 second, you would see weeks and weeks Palumbo and Phillips are meeting up. Like, even if you didn't know officially when Phillips and Palumbo met being after Greg's murder, you could be
Uh-huh.
like, well, Palumbo could not have been at these meetings trying to recruit this man because he was in prison.
Exactly. Something that's very easily verifiable.
Yeah, anything else, you're like, okay, oh, they're saying they met later, whatever. But no, this is an undeniable fact.
Yeah. So this was the final proof to the conviction integrity unit that Fred's whole testimony was a lie. So the conviction integrity unit and Phillips' lawyers assembled a hearing on March 28, 2018. The case against Richard Phillips was officially dismissed, and he was a free man after 47 years and was officially exonerated.
Yeah, because if you think about too, the timeline we've been telling you, in 2014, they find out about this 2010 testimony.
Yeah.
They know about it for 4 years, waiting on a new trial. 4 years. Like, insane.
Yeah, it really is. So Greg lost his life at a very early age, and he didn't get to see his son grow up or have more kids. And Phillips also lost so much of his life in prison being wrongfully convicted. Griggs Truitt said that Phillips lost a lot of friends because they thought that he killed Greg, and many people have died in that 47 years and likely went to their grave thinking Phillips was his murderer. Phillips' own mother, Annie, died in 2005, 12 years before he was released. Fred Mitchell was also never charged with Greg's murder because he died in August of 1997 by overdosing on heroin in his mother's basement. So,
yeah, which is also why a lot of people speculate Palumbo finally told the truth in 2010 is because he's like, I'm not scared anymore because Fred Mitchell's dead. So I'll testify and hopefully I'll get clemency. That they're just being
yeah,
like, oh, you feel bad.
yeah. But that was also 13 years after Fred Mitchell died.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So when Phillips was released, he had nothing and now had to adjust to a brand new life outside of prison. I mean, just thinking about changes that take place over 47 years.
Yeah.
So an administrative assistant at the Michigan Innocence Clinic offered to let Phillips stay with her. So Julie Balmer knew what Phillips was going through because she had also been previously wrongfully incarcerated. Her nephew had died and she had been charged with his death because they believed he had shaken baby syndrome, which how many times are we going to talk about this topic in this
I was
podcast?
literally thinking that. Whenever I was typing it in, I was like, we just had this.
Yeah.
We just had this.
So she was later given a new trial and found six experts to testify that the baby had a stroke. And so she knew how scary and hard it was being straight out of prison, like on your own. So she took him to a casino with a buffet and let him eat all he wanted. And she also let him walk around a grocery store to take in all the sights. So he then remembered all of his art and he went to see his pen pal from prison and was connected with a gallery and actually got an art show. He has a website and sells a lot of his art, and he's also now trying to reconnect with his children and make up for lost time. So it was an adjustment, and they are still working on their relationship. In the CNN article, they say that his daughter has moved out of the country and has little desire to reconnect.
And it was just like he's in the episode, like the People Magazine Investigates
Uh-huh.
episode. So he's telling a lot of like his first person, experience with all of this. And like getting to the point of him being released and like showing the video of him like walking out and him just being like just like talking about it. Like he was like, I just walked around the grocery store. Like I was like, look at all the orange juices. He was like, there's
Yeah.
pulp, there's no pulp, there's extra pulp. And like he went to this buffet and like dessert, he was like, I just want like vanilla ice cream. I just want
Mm-hmm.
like vanilla soft serve ice cream. And it's like this man was just deprived of like 47 years of his life. So
Yeah.
like seeing him like walk out and he like walks out and he was like, I just looked up at the sky. Like I had to look up at the sky. And it's like I was just like crying because I was just like,
Yeah.
oh man, this is, and especially now with like the update today of like this man who was
Yeah.
executed today who's innocent. It's just like, God, like it's
And
tough.
the number of times that we know this has happened, it's
Hmm.
like clearly this is a flawed system.
Especially recently, like there's been
Yeah.
so many releases for wrongful convictions of people for multiple years, and it's just, ugh.
Which goes back to how many times have this happened to people who have already been executed that we did not know at that time
Which
because
is
there
the
was not a way to get that evidence.
sole reason I'm against the death penalty.
Yeah,
Sole reason.
exactly.
It's
Exactly.
that and that alone. Like there's obviously people who I'm like, yeah, like Ted Bundy. Like, okay, yeah, who
Yeah.
cares? But then there's people
But
like
as
this.
a system as a whole, it's like if you
Yeah,
cannot have a perfect system, then it should not be
yeah,
allowed. Yeah.
exactly.
And we will never have a perfect system. So Richard Phillips said, "You can't change destiny. This was my destiny, and it's a point I try to stress with everybody. You don't never know what's going to happen to you, so try to live a good life and try to live a peaceful life." He is still fighting to exonerate himself in the 1971 armed robbery case as well. This crime was also likely committed by Fred Mitchell. At the time of his release, Phillips' time in prison was the longest wrongful incarceration in the history of the United States, and this was surpassed in December of 2023 when Glenn Simmons was released after spending 48 years wrongfully convicted in Oklahoma. Richard Palumbo died in prison in April 2020 after complications with COVID, and he was 71 years old. So, of course, we always want to remember the victim, Greg Harris. He was only 21 years old with a new baby at home, and he had a full life ahead of him that was stolen away by Richard Palumbo and Fred Mitchell. And that is the horrific, tragic murder of Greg Harris and wrongful conviction of Richard Phillips.
Yeah, just like sad all around. Like it's somebody lost their life. Like two people lost their lives. Like someone
Yeah.
was murdered and then they convicted the wrong person. And like
Mm-hmm.
poor Greg's family and
Yeah.
children then one day being like, wow, like this guy, I thought this guy did it, and now he's lost most of his life in prison. Like,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, that's nothing on the family, but I'm sure that's like an addition to your grief. Like, I lost my son, my husband, my father, my brother, my cousin, and now, especially like they knew Richard Phillips. Like, this was a tight
Yeah.
knit group, friend group, and they knew Fred Mitchell. Like they all knew each
Exactly.
other. So it's like, wow. And then I thought he did it, and it was this other guy all along. Like just like so many levels of tragedy, basically.
Yeah, I mean, just so many layers to people's lives who were ruined by this.
Yeah, just just a tough one. And I hate there wasn't much more about Greg Harris out there, not
Yeah.
much I could find. And also it's a very common name. So when you Google it, it's very hard to find
Yeah.
actual information as well. But we did relay as much as we could find.
Yeah.
So
Well, we started out sad and just kept getting sad. So let's try to turn this around just a little bit at the end here. Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
So, my perk of the week is my latest reality show obsession because I'm very behind on reality shows and I'm slowly getting caught up. But my latest obsession is Summer House. So, it is consuming my every thought. I was just watching season 4 reunion before we came to record, and it just started getting juicy. And I was like, dang it, I gotta go record. But
You're like, let's wrap this up so I can get back and find out what happens.
yeah, but and again, like I'm like 4 years behind too. I'm like 4 seasons behind. So a lot's happened since then. All of this is basically irrelevant that I'm watching, but I still enjoy it. And then also, Real Housewives of Salt Lake City came back on last week. So
Nice.
just a good time for some reality TV watching.
A lot of fun TV happenings.
Yeah, I've become real deeply enthralled with like reality TV. I don't know, it's just so nice to just watch. I can't explain it,
Yeah.
you know?
I mean, whatever brings you joy, you know?
Yeah. And Kevin is always just like, "Why the fuck are you watching this?" And I'm like, "Why the fuck do you play video games all the time? That's also a
Right?
fake world."
You're like,
It's
we're just
also
doing what we can in this world to bring us a little bit of
I know.
happiness.
It
Okay, if
makes me
this
think
brings me
of
happiness, just let it be.
I listened to Allison Cooch's sports podcast,
Uh-huh.
and she was talking about like fantasy football, and she was like, "Don't let men ever say like women are crazy or irrational or like dumb for having imaginary things. Like they literally cannot afford a football team, so they
Right.
assemble a fake football team to like whatever." I was like, "That's too true. That means she's not wrong. That it's
That
like."
is very true. I love
They're
her.
they can't afford an NFL team, so they're just making a fake one. But
Did you see her video with Obama?
yes. And it said like Michelle's husband.
Yeah, it was so
That
good.
was amazing. Anyway, that's my perk of the week, and that's just, some reality TV brain rot, just enjoying my time. But yeah, Jacqueline, what is your perk of the week?
Speaking of football, my perk of the week, which has a bit of a downer, but it's all right.
I was like,
But
are you gonna make this your perk of the week?
yeah, it was still my perk of the week. So Andrew and I went to Cincinnati to go to our annual Bengals game, at 36 weeks pregnant, which was I went back and forth for quite a while on whether or not I was comfortable with that, but finally just decided to go for it. It was a nice little baby moon, a nice little trip away, just the two of us. But the Bengals did lose, which broke our streak of never seeing them lose at home. So this was like
Ooh.
I think this was our eighth or ninth game seeing them at home and the first time we've seen them lose. So,
Had to happen
we had to ruin the
eventually.
streak at some point. So, but we still had a
I
good
mean, it was
time.
a good game.
It was that's the thing, like it was a fun game to watch. And it also, like, we were just outplayed. Like, I feel like it's much easier to accept a loss when it was just like yeah, you just truly
Hmm.
lost versus like, oh, there were like bullshit penalties or like
Yeah.
one penalty that like, like one small mistake that like threw the whole outcome of the game,
Hmm.
stuff like that versus just like, no, we were just outplayed. Like, but it
And
was a good
like,
game.
yeah, it was like you kind of came back to where it was like, oh, but this game, it's not like a
Yeah,
blowout. Like you're not sitting there watching like a 69-3 game or something.
exactly. When
And
there
you
was like
saw like I think it was um the other quarterback broke some record, some NFL record. They were saying.
yeah.
Jaden Daniels, it was like most passing yards by a rookie or I don't know, something
Yeah,
like that.
something. Yeah, I can't remember
Some
exactly
there
what
was
it was,
some
but something like
statistic
that.
that yeah. So I mean, you saw some history, I guess.
Yeah. And it was funny too when there were like, I think it was like 2.5 minutes left in the game. And we were like down by two touchdowns and like we had the ball and a bunch of people like left. And I was like, but what if we score here and we get the onside kick and we score? Like, it is possible. Okay.
It's
And like all
possible.
y'all would have missed it. So I was like, we're not
Yeah.
leaving. Like,
That was like the Tennessee Oklahoma game where that game still came kind of close, and like a bunch of
Yeah.
Oklahoma people left, and I was like, but what if they do come back?
Exactly. You're like, what if? But it was funny because we were leaving, and of course, Andrew's like disappointed, but he's like, at least we had a good time together. And like, right after he said that, we like passed this couple who were like screaming at each other, like something about a babysitter, and I don't know what it was, but they were like going at it, and he's like, well, they did not have a good night together. I was like, nope, they sure
They
did
did
it.
not enjoy their time together. Oh.
But yes, so still had a good time, even though we did not win. And Andrew joked that Millie is his favorite child because we went to the Super Bowl the year that she was born. But then I reminded him that when I was pregnant with Millie is when Joe Burrow got hurt. So our kids just aren't good luck in the womb. They're good luck after they get here.
So
So
you got to
maybe
have hope
next
for
year.
next year. Yeah.
Exactly. So, you know. But yeah, so that was my perk of the week. Let us know your perks of the week. Let us know your thoughts on this case. Of course, if you guys ever have any updates that you want us to cover, which by the time you hear about them, tell us, and then we record and then get them released, it might be a little delayed, but obviously we do
We'll still
miss
get them
lots of
out.
updates.
Or if you have ones like this, like you want us to cover, let us know because we still take case recommendations. We haven't gotten a
Yeah.
case recommendation in a long time.
Yeah, please do. Let us know. So yeah, you guys know where to find us. We are on all the places, on all the things. It's in our show notes. Just Google caffeinated crimes and whatever medium you're looking for. I'm sure you'll find us. Patreon.com/caffeinated crimes is our most important platform where we do have all kinds of bonus episodes and you can chat with us on Discord. We have pins, we have stickers, we have, random little gifts. We have just all kinds of fun stuff over there. So come see what we got going on and, join us, hang out with us, be our friend. I don't know.
All that. Um, yeah, and if you would mind to give us 5 stars on Apple, on Spotify, anywhere that has like a rating system, we greatly appreciate that. And on YouTube, if you would like subscribe, any of that, it would be greatly appreciated. But in the meantime, go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.